Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Ripple Intent Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Kyle Makrowski, and with me, as always, is our co-host, John Grant. Go ahead, say hi to everybody.
Hey, listeners. Great to have you.
We are here again with another episode. We try to do what we can at Ripple Intent to make our work better. We look at the human side, the soft side, the leadership side, all those human aspects that we want to bring and better ourselves at work to have less drama and have more production. Be less, drama is a great way to put it. Been thinking a lot about this lately. People keep asking what we do and what is Ripple Intent all about, and we have found many different ways to describe it. But what I keep hearing that seems to resonate the most is we do really focus on the individual. We focus on the human side. We focus on who we are as people and how to best bring that to our work. And today with us is a fantastic guest to help us explore that. Jenny Hastings, we met, a couple, 3 years ago. You came maybe even before COVID. I can't even remember. It's been a long time, but part of our time together has been through a variety of things. We're going to talk about one of those today, but she has been instrumental in bringing Ripple Intent to the Sacramento area. So please, Jenny, introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, I'm Jenny Hastings with Boulder Associates. I have been at Boulder going on 20 years. Next year it'll be 20 years. So I spent the first 16 or 17 as an interior designer, and now I'm on the business development side. So I'm excited to be here to talk to you guys today.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us today. And for those who don't know, Boulder Associates is a healthcare-focused architecture firm. They design all kinds of really cool spaces for healthcare, hospitals, clinics, you name it, everything in between. And you guys are now in how many states? You've grown quite a bit.
We have. When I first started at Boulder, we were 2 offices, and now we just acquired a firm in Seattle, so we're 9 offices, and they're starting to branch. That office in Seattle does science and tech. They do workplace, so we're starting to branch out of healthcare. But for the first 40 years of the firm, we lived in healthcare and senior living, so it's exciting.
That is exciting. And that's so Seattle, Colorado, California. You're in Arizona, Texas?
Yeah, Texas and North Carolina.
North Carolina. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We were talking about a number of things, and one of the places we wanted to start was you said you did 17 years on the interior design side and then transitioned to the business development side. And part of that was through some awareness of your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about that? How did that come to be? How did that transition? Where did that come from? Why did it happen? And what the heck did your strengths have to do with it?
How did I get to that side when I was trained as an interior designer?
Yeah, absolutely.
I like I said, spent my first 16 or 17 years as an interior designer, and we had the session with you doing the analysis of Strengths Finder. So we took the test. We had a whole day looking at our strengths, and coming out of that exercise, so a couple of my strengths, the woo was one of my strengths, and then my strengths, I'll tell you my strengths first. So positivity, competition, woo, strategic, and futuristic were mine. And, but I left the session and didn't really think that much about it, but I come home and I start thinking about like elements of my work that I enjoy and elements of the work that are a little bit more challenging for me. And I realized that what I loved the most about design and design projects was the team element of it, was collaborating with people, working together as a team, building those relationships, taking those relationships to additional projects. So it was that was a lot of what I loved. And we were doing some more business development in the Sacramento office to kind of grow and meet some new clients out in this area. And I started doing more business development, and that wasn't what I had historically done. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And it wasn't the sales part of it per se. It was the meeting new people, talking to people, hearing what they're concerned about, what we could do to support them, like building those relationships with potential clients and other partners within the AEC industry. And so I took that and have now taken that into helping oversee business development for the firm. So it's kind of grown from something that I never thought when I started at BA that I'd be on the BD and marketing side, but I think it plays to the things that I enjoy the most about the work that we do as a firm. So it was exciting to be able to transition into that.
So tell us a little bit more. So I'm going to say your strengths again for the group. So
Yeah.
positivity, competition, woo, strategic, and futuristic. So a lot of those, 4 out of the 5 of those words make sense. So for folks who aren't quite familiar, can you share what woo is and how it shows up for you?
Yes. So winning others over, woo. So it's it's not being afraid to go into a room and meet new people, to talk to people, to interact with folks, and do it in a way that isn't necessarily just on the technical project way. It's actually developing those relationships. And again, that's something that I always loved as part of the projects that I was involved in. Like I hated when a project ended, when it was that amazing team dynamic, which we felt before, when it was just working really well. I hated those projects ending because those relationships. So I try to carry those on outside of the projects as well. And so that element of, again, being able to build relationships and meaningful relationships, I definitely treasure a lot of those relationships that I have on the projects that I worked on. And so now in my role, continuing to build those relationships or help others build those relationships it's fun for me now, because I realize that it's something I really enjoy doing, which is not what a lot of maybe architects and designers love doing. So I get to do a lot of it.
Well, most of us who don't have the woo talent are usually envious of those that do. I think it lives somewhere around 33 or 34 out of the total 34 strengths for me. So, but I love the way you're describing it, because a lot of folks often kind of look at woo and they're like, oh, that's the social butterfly, and they just kind of flutter around the room and have those like quick surface level conversations. But I'm hearing you actually take it even deeper, that it really is more about you're able to quickly establish a relationship with other people. Which I don't think we traditionally think of that way. How does that, so I will say also, it's not totally uncommon for it to be paired with positivity. That seems to be a really wonderful combination of how those show up together. Can you, just tell us a little bit more, right? Like, how does that actually help you lean in on the relationship side and building something deeper or stronger with other people?
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about like how people perceive woo, because I think sometimes even within my firm, people will say, "Oh, we need to plan a party." Well, Jenny can do it because she will love parties, and I'm like, "Well, sure, I enjoy going to parties. I don't necessarily want to plan said party." But so there's like this correlation between like the social aspect of life and then what woo is, and I think that it's, again, it's around recognizing that at least for myself personally, like I really enjoy building relationships with people that go beyond the projects that we do. It's like, how do you get to know people at a level where, I don't necessarily need to go on vacations with them on the weekends, but knowing like who they are and what they enjoy, and maybe elements of them outside of work, because I feel like who we are, in our world outside of work shows up in the work and in the projects that we do. And so I think that it's building those relationships has just always been really important to me. And I think that we sometimes, I was listening to one of the episodes, Kyle, and you were talking about how it's, sometimes people say, well, why do we need to worry? People can go in and build projects. We don't need to get to know one another, right? We're designers, we're architects, we're contractors, we know what to do, let's just go. But so much of that, which is I think why I've always resonated with Ripple Intent, so much of what we do is reliant on how we relate to one another. And so I think just understanding our team members at a level beyond, you are an architect, you are an engineer, you are a designer, is incredibly important in what we do. And so I think that's how I've seen it show up for me on the work side, and then also with the way that I get to connect with people across the firm, because I work with folks in all of our 9 offices, and so really trying to understand who my colleagues are at a level beyond just a designer or an architect, but what interests them, what passions do they have, how can I support them, trying to go after work that fuels them. That's where it kind of manifests itself in different ways internally to my work with the firm as well.
Well, and so you also said then number two for you was competition.
Mm.
How does that show up for you? And do you ever see conflicts with competition and perhaps your woo and positivity?
Yeah. So when we took the Strengths Finder and competition showed up for me, I was like, I'm not competitive. What this must be a mistake. And then, again, you come out of it and you reflect and, I played sports growing up in school, and so there was a little bit of that competition, but as a professional, I didn't think that it showed up for me. But then I realized, like on the business development, well, even when I was on the design side, being able to go after really robust projects or help be on a team that's tasked with going after winning work, like I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. I think that there's an element of making sure, trying to balance like a healthy level of competition, but that still feels true to the positivity side of who I am, that it's not like I'm going to win at all costs or I'm going to take down somebody to do this. Like it's in the spirit, I think, of just trying to, at least from my perspective at Boulder Associates, try to grow the firm in a healthy way and help win projects that everybody likes working on. But I think sometimes it's trying to make sure that I'm aware of that level of competition and making sure that it's something that I still feel good about it in the spirit of chasing work, that it's not something that I take to another level beyond, just trying to, chase and win great projects for the firm. So, but it's a balance for sure.
How do those come into play at home?
No.
General question, not those three specifically.
Oh, so Kyle and I were talking before you jumped on about like kids sports, like the way that I want, like the competitive side of me with watching my kids play sports. I'm like, oh, I just want them to win, but then I would just want them to have fun, but then I want them to do well and succeed. And so I think again, I'm aware of like the level that competition can take, and I don't want to like instill a healthy level of competition in my children as well. And so I think I see it sometimes with my kids as they're growing, to try and foster, again, that balance of, it's great to want to win, but how do you be a graceful winner and also be a graceful loser? So I think that there's an element of some of that, but I see it as one example of how I see it at home for sure.
Do you have to be, are you the first one to every red light?
No.
No, you don't drive that way?
No, I'm actually, my husband hates driving with me because he says I'm the slowest driver that so that's where, like, again, when competition showed up, I was like, that's because I didn't think that I was, but I think there's just certain elements of how it shows up. I don't think it's in a everyday thing, because yes, I'm not the first to every red light.
So how did the transition go when you moved from interior design to business development? Because I remember you mentioned that you took the CliftonStrengths assessment and you went, well, this makes sense. And I somehow, between taking it and then the shift in role, what happened there?
We were chasing some work in Sacramento, and I was a more active part in that. And again, I realized like how much I enjoyed doing it. It was really hard though to decide to transition to it full time versus doing interiors. Because again, I was trained as an interior designer. I love interior design. And it was recognizing like, am I going to miss that design aspect when I move over to business development? And so it took a while for me I had to recognize that I only have so much time in the day, and I can't have my hands in I can't still be in design while doing business development, especially as the role started to grow into a more firm-wide role. But I think the way I started to reconcile it for myself is to realize that for me, business development is just a different design problem. It's like, how do you match the right people with the right project? How do you develop a strategy for how we'd approach a project to talk to a client? How do we support the clients when we're chasing work, those types of things. And so I just started to think about how it becomes a different version of a design problem, so that I can still use the training that I have in design and what I loved about design and solving problems and being challenged to find different solutions, and then just looking at it from the business development side. So that's how I've kind of reconciled that with myself. I still miss design, but but it's different now.
Oh, sure. I mean, you put that much time and energy and effort into it. Were you encouraged, or who recognized this? Were you like, okay, I did this first one and now I liked it. Did they keep pulling you in to do more, or did you kind of find your way in to do more, or was it both?
I think so. When I first started doing it, I'm a big systems, like I did a lot of projects that were run with like integrated project IPD projects with client out here in Northern California. So that kind of lean thinking, problem solving aspect was what I had done in my work. And so when I went to do more business development, I started taking some of those systems, like tracking commitments, looking at how we manage the success of our business development teams. And so put some systems in place in Northern California that ended up being pretty successful in getting some new clients, getting some new work into the Northern California market. And so our executive vice president, who is based out of San Francisco, he and I were working together, and just I think he recognized that, hey, maybe we could take this and take it down to one of our other offices. And so I started working with our Dallas office a little bit, started to see some growth there, again, by taking some of the systems that I had applied in Northern California and moving them. And so then it kind of just grew from there, recognizing, because we didn't have a firm-wide business development director before. And so with some of those successes, just started taking that and then working with business development teams across all 8 of the offices, and now 9 with our Seattle office. So it was organic, and it took some time, but I think once we saw success, we just wanted to translate some of that into other offices as well.
That makes a lot of sense, and part of why I ask is because there's been so many situations where people, they're good at their job, they're in the box, they're in the job description, they're in that interiors role, they're in whatever role they're in, and they went, this is what I know how to do, this is where I've learned how to do it, and I'm good at it, but something's missing, or I dabbled in something else and it really fired me up, and yet what ends up happening is either for self, we keep ourselves in that box because we go, this is not my job, this is my job, and so I'm going to stay in my job, or it takes either some element of ourselves. I don't want to say courage, because it doesn't necessarily have to do anything with courage. Sometimes it can feel courageous, but it takes some sort of motivation, whether it's intrinsic motivation or somebody outside that pulling you, going, hey, I think you might do well here. Can you help with this? Or I'm supposed to do this aspect of my job, but this person over here is a heck of a lot better at it, so I'm going to give them that. And for whatever reason, we've been trained to feel guilty for that piece. Asking you to help on the pursuits. Some of those folks saw it as a selfish. I don't say selfish. They're doing it for self-interest. They're doing it for the firm's interest. They're doing it. Hey, you're bringing value to this, but we're asking you to now do more work above and beyond your day job. And so there's some guilt with that. And I think we have all experienced that where, yeah, I'd love to help out, but now I'm overburdened. Whereas actually when you were doing those, my guess is you felt like this is really cool. And it really didn't matter how much time when you were a part of that. It was just something that you were naturally wired to do. And like, this is fun. I could do this all day. Yes, I still have my day job, but I like doing this stuff.
Yeah, I think that, Jon, you touched on it earlier when you, like, how does competition show up? And this idea of, like, the being in competition with yourself. And so I think sometimes in this, like I said, I've been at Boulder 20 years, almost 20 years. So it's like continuing to go and what's next? What's the next challenge? And I think that, I was fortunate that Boulder supported me kind of reinventing myself into this role, because it, again, wasn't where my training wasn't where they didn't hire me as a marketing person, right? And so being able to shift over to this space, I do think, to your point about kind of the guilt in that transition period, I think when I had to shed some interior design responsibilities, and I was also involved more with we have a director of research who does research with us, that I was involved with work with her. And so which these other things were also passions of mine. I really loved evidence-based design work and how did that infuse into our projects. But at some point, to your point, you only have so many hours in the day. And it was recognizing that in order to be my best self, I really have to commit to one lane. And because again, I'm not going to be any good to the firm and I'm going to stress myself out if I can't narrow my focus a little bit. But it was hard to reconcile because you think, oh, I got to, the firm expects me to do this, or I love doing this and I don't want to let my team down. I don't want to not support people in these things that I had been committed to. So there was that reconciling that guilt but then being able to be in that lane of doing what I loved, because it makes it to show up to work every day and get to do something that plays to your strengths is the best spot to be in, because it's what you are good at, what you love, and how do you take that and capitalize on it. But certainly guilt, I would say. I still feel some of that with not wanting to let people down, but you can only do so much.
Oh, the environment you just described, it's beautiful, because I've heard so often, we don't design roles, and we certainly don't place individuals in positions based on who they are. We create those roles based on the business need. And it always is like a pang of, ouch, really? Are we really saying that? Because, the business is all about the people, yet we're going to craft roles and we're going to organize the structure based on what the business driver is. And it's like, well, can't the two exist? Can't they coexist? And it sounds like your transition was exactly that. It is a coexistence of, all right, we have multiple business needs, and we have this individual with this makeup of strengths and this desire, this high level engagement when you're doing these things. And so how can we craft and shape and take advantage of, I say take advantage in a very positive way, how can we align the work with the people who are best suited to do the work and have this tremendous amount of engagement with that work? And then how do we backfill whatever pieces and parts still have to be backfilled as you take on those roles and responsibilities? That's fantastic. So of course, not to transition, but of course, what one of the results of all of this was, oh, sure, let's go ahead and bring Ripple Intent to Sacramento, just, because I got nothing else to do. And that was in
my
December,
spare time, right? No.
yeah, December 2021. And we were like, hey, let's make this happen. And we were like, oh, yes, of course. Why not?
Yeah.
So you got to expand a little bit on that. Where did that come from, and what drove that, and what got that started?
Yes. Well, so Juan Ramos, who has been on the podcast before, he, I think, had reached out because you and Juan had been connecting about, hey, we're continuing to branch Ripple out into different areas. And so we thought, he had talked about Sacramento being an option. And I immediately, when he said that to me, I was immediately like, I'm in, sign me up. And I think so much of that was, the involvement with you at the Strengths Finder session, what that had done for me personally, and how that had set me on this trajectory to be in a completely different space than I thought, just by that whole day. It was like 8 hours of training that totally changed where I went. And so I obviously was like, I will absolutely support this and advocate for it. And I think the timing of it in Sacramento was great, because there's a lot of construction happening here. And obviously I've lived in the healthcare space for a long time, but a lot of healthcare work happening out here. And, those projects specifically, complex teams, the scale of them, the dynamic of them can be very involved. And so, we obviously have active chapters of the Lean Construction Institute, Design Build Institute, playing a role in the community. But I felt that what Ripple Intent brings to the table from the soft skills, the human factors that were talked about earlier, was needed. It wasn't talked about in this market. And so luckily we've had a lot of success with people participating and continue to participate in that, recognizing the same thing, that we need to balance, like, how to manage a project to a schedule, to a budget, if it's design build, integrate our partners, the teams are all integrated, but how do we interact at a level that's that interpersonal space that we all need to live in to make these complex projects successful. So I think the timing of bringing it was great as well.
I love that, because you're strategic, and here you go, Jon, silver platter. You're strategic and you're futuristic, Jenny. Were in full swing when this opportunity presented itself, and you were like, of course.
It was, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was just such a it was a fortuitous thing. I think there's an element of the timing of that, but with how much is happening in this market, and also what I knew, because I was involved on the design side with like in IIDA's International Interior Design Association, was involved in that for years. So I knew enough about the design community to know that Sacramento is a big city, but it's still a small AEC network of people. And so even as it grows, but I think people are very receptive to new ideas, new thinking. It's just, that's what I've always felt from the community, even when I was on the design side. So I think being able to bring this was just kind of that missing piece in this market for helping professionals grow in the work that they do.
So leaning in, because yes, the strategic and the futuristic, I imagine you just saw that end state. This is what we need. This is what we can become. Yeah. And this is one of the pathways to get there. Right? Starting up Ripple Intent and bringing it out, and what does that look like? So this has been, Ripple Intent's been in Sacramento now, really mostly because of you, right? Getting this going and building the community out there, where it's just amazing. We're so appreciative of all that effort that you put into it. We've been out there now for over a year and a half. And
in December, 2 years. We're coming up on our 2 year.
Right, it's amazing. And I think we looked at this before. You've had 300 people come through, which doesn't count our repetition with all the people who are there on a repeated basis and getting more and more involved. What has that been looking like? What are you hearing from everyone? Why is this resonating?
I think what I hear most from people is that they just felt like it was a missing piece of the discussion, which, like I mentioned earlier, that it just felt like the types of events that are put on for the AEC community are not geared towards the soft skills of what we do. And so when I remember coming out, one of the earlier discussions we had around joy and how joy shows up in the workplace and how it shows up outside. Someone came up to me after the event and they were like, I can't believe we just spent an hour talking about joy. Like at an AEC event, because again, that's not a thing that normally gets discussed, but it was beautiful, right? Because you're talking about what brings you joy in your personal life, and then what can also bring you joy in the workplace. Because obviously, we have these dual lives that we lead, and when they're out of sync with one another, we feel it, right? And so how to sync up our personal and professional lives and think about that, which I think is what I always love about these events, where you talk about who you are as an individual, but then how that shows up in your professional career. And so I think that's it. The fact that people want to talk about these things, but haven't had a space to do that before, and a safe space that feels totally appropriate for the AEC industry, that it's not like to be in a room with your peers or people you're working with on projects and have these facilitated discussions about these topics like values and joy and others. People want that. They want to have a safe space to talk about that. And I think it's healthy and it's fantastic that people have embraced it out here.
I love that. I think I was there for the joy conversation. And and it's one of those where you're like, as soon as you introduce the topic, people, they tilt their head sideways. They look at you a little funny and they're like, we can talk about this? You're like, why aren't you talking?
This is what we're doing.
I think more of it's, are we really going to talk about this? Okay.
But then as you get rolling, don't you feel I felt like the same thing, because that was one of the early events, right? And so people are like, wait, what? Huh? And then you get going and you see this level of participation from people where you can just feel that people really wanted to talk about a topic like this, or feel safe to talk about it. And I think that I've always been just so excited about the level of engagement that we get from people being really open and honest about who they are as individuals and how that shows up in the work that they do. It's just always, at every event, it continues to amaze me that people are just so willing to show up for those events like that. And I think it's a testament to what you all have done with the organization to bring that level of that kind of security around having these discussions in a way that feels safe and healthy for all of us that need it.
So if somebody, I'll put you on the spot here, if somebody were interested in getting it going in their city, could they get a hold of you and go, okay, before I talk to Kyle and Jon, can you give me the lowdown on what really this is all about? Would you be willing to have that conversation?
I would love, well, again, I'm an advocate. I will say nothing but the best things. I mean, it's obviously as you get it going, it's challenging, right? It's trying to, because when people, I think there's an element of, wait, what is this organization? What is happening? And what is this about? And you kind of have to, you got to give the elevator pitch a couple of times, but then just come to one event, and you'll see. And because what we've seen too in Sacramento is that you get more people coming from companies, right? So a person comes, and then it's like, and then two of their colleagues come from the same company, and then two more. We've had some repetition from different companies, which clearly means that people are going back and saying positive things about the experience, right? So I think there's a benefit in, word of mouth is huge for this.
Yeah, and we've attracted some help along the way when we first got started. Tim Albiani with McCarthy was more than happy to host and try to help drive some help, drive some attendance, and then along the way, Dina Null showed up from HMC, and she was super excited and brought a lot of energy and helped do the one at UC Davis and then also at HMC, and so along the way, some of this attracts others, and together we end up hitting. I remember there was one not too long ago where you said, "Hey, how are we looking?" And I said, "Oh, we're almost sold out." And you're like, "Really? How did that happen?" And it was like, I know. So you hit that critical mass, and it does become sustaining, pretty self-sustaining after some time. And so it's super cool to see how we've been able to use. Well, here's what Jenny and the folks in Sacramento have been able to do as kind of if we can replicate that, we can be successful where you're at. So really appreciate all your effort and energy, and just go back to your positivity. It's been fantastic to keep this thing going. We could certainly keep going, but we are just about out of time. Before we do go, I want to ask each of you, so after this conversation today, what's one thing that you'd want our listeners to be leaving with? I'll start with you, Jenny.
I think, speaking from my own personal experience, is to not be afraid of leaning into your strengths and the willingness to attempt to do something in your life that might be different than what you're doing currently, so that you can play to the strengths that you have and live your best self in your professional life. And I think that then ripples to your personal life as well, and it all becomes a beautiful thing. So don't be afraid to lean into that.
Oh, that's amazing.
Well said. How about you, Jon?
Yeah, I really love that. I mean, I have spent the better part of the past 10 years understanding my strengths and how they show up, and then learning when to activate them, and when the activation potentially hurts other people, so I can kind of modulate. But there's one point, because I really want our listeners to take this part away, is that we spent a lot of today, right? I mean, Jenny, you live in the construction industry, so we've been talking about a lot, and how those pieces and parts relate. But for our listeners, the topics we talk about at a Ripple Intent event are not specific to construction. This is just about people. It's about how you show up at work and how others perceive you. And so this is for anyone that works. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, what kind of work you do, or where you're from. This is just common to the human experience. So we'd love to keep branching out. Some of our different groups have folks that come from outside the construction industry. And so it's just it's also a great experience for them as well. Kyle, how about you?
I don't know how to top what you both just shared. I think the one thing is, if you are hesitant or wondering what it takes, or curious about making it happen, where you bring Ripple Intent to your community, reach out to Jenny. She will tell you how easy it is and how painless it is and how simple you can make it happen. So yeah, I think that's a really cool takeaway. Same with what you both said as well. So with that, I think this ends our time together today. I want to thank you both for joining us. Thank you for Jenny taking time out of your day to join us and have this conversation, your insights and your willingness to be vulnerable and share your strengths and how that has impacted your career and your life. Thank you for that. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. You can find everything on the website at rippleintent.org. And if it's not quite this February 1st and 2nd of 2024 when you're listening to this, keep in mind that the symposium is on schedule. Feel free to register, check out more information again at the website. Reach out to Jon or I if you have any specific questions. So with that, I will leave us. Thank you again for joining us. And until next time, hope all is well. Take care.